Hi, everybody. Welcome to our next webinar, which is all about how to ramp enterprise SDRs faster with better onboarding. So I'm going to start off by just giving a little bit of background on myself and Delta V, and then I will dive into the topic that we are going to be covering today. So my company is a business called Delta V. We build and operate outbound SDR teams, generally for software companies who are selling complex solutions into large enterprise. And we have a specific focus on fintech and financial technology. My background is that I've been in sales for about 20 years, and I've been leading and training salespeople for 15 of those years. In terms of Delta V, founded the business 5 years ago. Training, onboarding has been a massive focus for me in terms of kind of hiring and developing people in our business. There's been, for me, in the journey of like being sales leaders, there's been a lot of learnings along the way. But the idea today is really to share a lot of the principles and the way that we do things at Delta V. And these are the methods that I've used in my sales career to get green SDRs who have never done SDR work before to book meetings on their first day of doing outreach, hit quota in their first month, and that's full quota and not ramp quota. And also, a lot of these principles are also transferable to if you are training and onboarding AEs. I've trained up AEs and I've seen them hit 50,000 USD in closed won deals in their second month of of being on the job. So kind of how I got here in terms of, I guess, kind of hopefully being good at training and onboarding is that I think early on in my career, I had the benefit of working with some great managers and they invested a lot of time in training me. And I think a lot of the principles that I cover are things that I think I was lucky enough to kind of be exposed to early on in my sales career. In terms of at Delta V, I've built all of our training from the ground up. And I believe that we have a market-leading internal SDR program for our business. So in terms of today's session, I would love it if it could be as interactive as possible. So please ask lots of questions in the chat. I will get to every question. We will, while I'm running through this presentation, please fire away with questions. I will answer them as they come up. And then also at the end of the session, there will also be some Q&A time as well for people to ask any questions. So please, guys, don't be shy, fire away. Let's make this as interactive as possible. All right, so starting off, before I dive into the content, a question for the audience, and please, this would be great if we can start the interactions here, but in the experience of the audience, why does, broadly speaking, training and onboarding fail? And more specifically, why does sales training fail? If anybody has any opinions on this, please share away in the chat. So in my experience, where I've seen kind of training and onboarding be ineffective has been when you bring on board a rep and then you throw too much content at them for them to easily consume. So you just bombard them with information and then they forget most of it. Another key thing is in sales, there's lots of kind of sales methodologies and theory, but it's very hard often to translate theory into practice. So giving people sales training that is really focused on theory and is not actually being made context specific and super easy for somebody to apply is a big one. So Sarah, I say that you just saw your message come through, but yeah, one of the things is there's no follow-up once training's done and team members are thinking they don't need the training. 100%. So that is absolutely one of the key critical things that where sales training fails. I think just talking back to, so theory only training is what I've seen not work. Training that's not context specific. So if you're working off a theory or a framework or a methodology, what you need to do is translate that into the actual context that the particular rep is going to be working on. And that could be context like markets, target buyer, product, those sorts of things. And then what you want to be doing is translating into stuff that's super easy to apply for a team member. And then I think to another area where training fails, and this is I think a classic, is where you train people on stuff and they're not required to put it into action immediately. So example would be you join some big corporate intake, you go on a 3-month training program. At the end of 3 months, you haven't been required to do any work yet. And on day one of going and doing real work, you've forgotten everything that you were taught. So ideally, the way you want to be delivering training is you train somebody on something and immediately they put it into action. And then I think, very much to Sarah's point that she's made in the chat, is that if there is no review or control mechanism that you have no way of knowing that like the training has been adopted and correctly applied. So those are kind of the big things that you want to watch out for when you're thinking around how you run training and onboarding. And that is kind of the baseline that how I've thought about it in my business. So in terms of developing training and onboarding, I've found it to be very useful to bucket what I'm training people on into specific kind of topic areas, because it helps me to figure out, it makes it a lot easier for me to figure out the time and the right timing for when I want to be training somebody on a particular item. So I think about training like this. So there are kind of 4 critical areas that we all train an SDR on in our business. And so there is domain knowledge, which is basically the required background knowledge that a rep needs to do their job. So that thing could be things like information, understanding the product, understanding the ICP and personas, understanding the competitive environment. So there's domain knowledge that we need to train reps on. The next item that we need to train reps on is sales process, which is really like what to do when. And another way of thinking around process is that process is all the things that require no talent for someone to get right. It is literally following a set of steps. The next training area that we also train people on is, we call it sales craft. You could call it sales skills, but it's really the how to do it. And so the difference between process and the craft is, the process is like, these are the steps you take. The craft is how do you actually kind of do things. So for instance, if I give you an example of, say, running a cold call, you could say that a good cold call has a process where you have a opener, so permission-based opener or upfront contract. You then highlight relevant pains to the prospect and confirm that they're relevant. You then give them a taste of what your proposition about is, confirm their intention to take a meeting with you, and then do some additional qualification before you get off the call. So that would be what your process for a call looks like. But the sales craft would be, well, how do you go and deliver a good permission-based opener? How do you make sure you sound great on the call? How do you ask the qualification questions in a way that gets people to give you the information that you need? So you want to distinguish those 2 things, because sales process is stuff that theoretically is really easy to get right, while sales craft is stuff that is takes a long time to get right. Like the way I think around sales craft, it's like going and playing a sport. You've got to do like a certain volume of reps, like playing tennis. You just got to go and hit a certain number of shots over and over again to actually start nailing it and getting it right. The last training area is technology, which is really just how to use the tooling that you are equipping reps with. So, data providers, CRM, sales engagement platform, those are all the kind of technology areas. I'll comment a little bit further, but out of interest from the audience, I would love to hear what you have found, which of these areas you have found it takes the longest for reps to get to grips with. So anyway, so in terms of how this kind of gets delivered is domain knowledge. You want to capture all the kind of required domain knowledge into a playbook that forms kind of the framework for any campaigns that you're running and is reference material for your reps. Sales process, you want to have nice, clearly articulated training documents which outline exactly the process that reps need to follow, and you want to design a process that makes it very hard for a human to get the process wrong. And then sales craft, that is, a lot of that is there's initial training and there's ongoing training and coaching that you need to do in order to get people to the point where they're performing well. And then technology is really easy because what these days with most of the vendors, they've got really good online training. So what you go and do is you just get your reps to do the relevant training courses for those vendors. Okay, moving on. So if you're now onboarding a rep, there's some principles that I apply for delivering high impact training, and for me these are of critical importance and are absolute non-negotiables in my business. So when hiring a new SDR or even AE or any type of salesperson into your business and onboarding them, regardless of experience, I want to train everybody exactly the same way. And the reason for that being is that I want to create a baseline where I know that there's a common understanding of what counts as good in my business. And for me as a leader, I know then that everybody is operating on the basis of that baseline. That's really important as well. And sometimes I'd say sometimes it's fine if that baseline is actually wrong, if it's not the best baseline. But if you have everybody operating the same way, it's much easier to get the data that tells you, hey, we need to change the way that we do something. And then you can iterate and improve that and then change your baseline that your team operates from. The next critical thing from a principal point of view is training reps on a need-to-know basis. So I think that one of the things that happens in many cases is people are absolutely, for instance, they'll come and get trained, get product training, and they will get taught anything and everything that they need to know about your product down to the most granular features. Particularly for an SDR, a lot of that is irrelevant. A good cold call that books a qualified meeting lasts 4 to 6 minutes. A rep should not be talking about detailed features of the product. They might need to know about them to have the context, but there should be no requirement for them to have to explain them in detail. What they need to be understanding broadly is kind of things like, high level, your buyer's pains, the benefits from using your product, success stories that similar types of organizations have had. So really in terms of training on a need-to-know basis, what we want to be doing, or how I train people, is I figure out what are the things that somebody needs to know to be successful in a role, and I only train them on those items, and I do not give them any other additional information, because it means that there's less for them to learn and it's much easier for them to digest it, and I know that I can move them faster through my training process. Another key principle is to deliver training in bite-sized, digestible chunks. So practically what that means is that no training session that we run in our business lasts longer than 45 minutes. And the principle in terms of the actual training material is that the content should not exceed more than one A4 page, if at a push, possibly 2 A4 pages. But the training session should not have more content than that. And the reason being that then makes it very easy for somebody to, well, first for you as the person who's running training on onboarding, it creates a great amount of discipline where you have to focus on the most important things to train somebody on. And then secondly, for the person who is receiving the training and is going through this onboarding process, they have a small amount of information that they need to digest, and it's much easier for them to learn that. And then the reason why 45 minutes is that generally people's brains switch off after 45 minutes. In my experience, that for me personally, I find if training goes longer than 45 minutes, my brain starts to switch off. If we're training people, the next critical thing to cement that knowledge into their brains is to actually get them to put that training into action immediately. So I'll show you guys a little bit shortly what a kind of onboarding program looks like and what that practically looks like. But literally, generally, after we've trained somebody on something, say, this is how you follow this process, they actually have to go and adopt that process and do the work. Or if we train people on how to do, say, sales craft, like how to go and make a great cold call, they're literally, next thing they're doing is literally doing role plays and then going into a call block. So they have to put that training into action immediately, and it gets cemented in terms of how they do things. I think the last piece that often gets missed in training, so people often develop great training and they train people on it and they assume that that is now being adopted and working well. But the critical piece to make sure that you actually have a robust training mechanism is that there's a control mechanism, some kind of feedback loop to ensure adoption. And so to take my cold calling example, that would be, for instance, after you've trained somebody how to cold call, they've gone and done their first call block, that following that call block, you go and run call reviews on those call recordings from that call block to ensure that they have absorbed the training and that they are following the basics of what you've trained them on. Cool. So I'm going to move on to now chat you through what this looks like practically in terms of a kind of training and onboarding schedule where we are applying these principles. So for us in our business, when we are onboarding an SDR into our business, we have them by day 5, we have them doing their first outbound activity. And I think in many businesses, people are first doing their first outbound activity somewhere around 3 or 4 days into, so 3 or 4 weeks only after they've joined the business. But let me talk you through kind of practically what this would look like. So day 2, in the first day in the business, they join and they're just getting up to speed with things, getting their equipment set up and so on and so forth. Day 2, we actually start the practical training process. Day 2, we're literally just giving them background knowledge around, say, the company they're representing, the target market they're going after, and they're getting some rudimentary understanding of the product, maybe a product demo, and then we map out the activities that they themselves need to do in terms of research, and then we look at what they need to kind of review with their manager. A better example of how this probably works would be, say, if you look at day 3, they've now understand kind of the market that they're operating, and we introduce them to the idea of how they could go and research a target account. So we train them on the process for qualifying in and researching a target account. They then need to go and actually research a bunch of accounts, and then the control mechanism or feedback loop is they then go and present that research to their manager and have a session where they review that. So, and then on the day-to-day basis, we build on the knowledge from one session to the next. So basically day 3, they're learning how to identify a good fit account. Day 4, they're learning how to identify contacts who match their specific buyer personas. Day 5, they're learning how to write emails to those specific people that they're going to be reaching out to, and they actually send those first emails. And then the following week, they're getting onto cold calling. So it's basically a process where every day you are training them on what they need to know to perform a specific task, getting them to do it, making sure they know how to do it by having a control mechanism, and then next day you move on to the next specific task that you want them to gain competency in. Please fire away with questions as well if you have. So in terms of how you then apply this in the process for like getting your SDRs to ramp according to your plan is that for me, the fundamental of ramping people fast through an onboarding process is number one thing to do is focus on adherence to process. So make sure the first thing that you do is make sure that your reps are following the process that you've trained them on. My experience has been that you can get reps about 50% of the way to productivity just by focusing on making sure that they are following process, which means that they are doing the right things at the right time. The next thing that, as you'll have seen from the training program and the speed at which we actually get reps kind of doing their first outbound activity, is that we throw them in the deep end. But there's a caveat to that, which I'll get to in a second. But we throw them in the deep end. And what that does is that's an incredibly powerful forcing function for making reps take what they're learning and doing seriously. And it forces them to learn. And also by going and doing activity really early on, they very quickly figure out what's working, what isn't working, or what they need to improve on. So that throwing in the deep end is really important, but what you want to be doing is, at the same time as doing that, is providing some room for reps to make mistakes. So what that means is, if you're throwing somebody in the deep end, don't go and have them reaching out to your most high value, highest quality accounts on day one or in their first week or first couple of weeks of work. What you rather want to be doing is like having them target those sort of tier 3, tier 4 accounts that you maybe don't care that much about, and having them using that as the kind of training ground for them before you actually let them go and work on the kind of higher quality accounts that you really want to convert into meetings. Critical to also ramping reps fast is having a record of all interactions. So this should be taken care of by the sales engagement platform that you're using, but you want to ideally be able to record all calls that they make. Obviously, that depends a little bit on markets that you're reaching out to and specific cold calling laws, but ideal scenario is you want to be recording calls, and you also want to be able to see and review all emails. Now, we use SalesLoft as our sales engagement platform, and they have probably my favorite feature in SalesLoft is the coaching section of SalesLoft, where you can actually go in and they have a coaching tab, and you can go into that coaching tab and you can see emails which they automatically categorize them by positive, negative sentiments. And similarly with calls, you can go in and review calls as well and see call notes and things like that. So having that record is really, really powerful in terms of your ability to kind of observe what reps are doing and then provide the appropriate coaching based on what you're seeing coming back from their activity. Critical to also getting reps to ramp is having reviews. So I call sort of interaction reviews, but basically that means call reviews and email reviews on a weekly basis. And I'll cover that for a little bit more how we do that at Delta V. But it's the way it works with, say, doing weekly call reviews with a rep is that you will. I mean, this is the experience that I've had, is that you have reps making cold calls in their first week, and you go into call reviews on a Friday, and you listen to those calls, and it's horrendous. It's horrible. It's horrible for you listening to those calls. It's horrible for the rep who has to listen back to their own calls. But you give them great constructive feedback. Next week, you come back, you do another call review session, and the calls are still terrible. It's still horrible for everybody involved to be sitting in one of these sessions. Week 3, you go and do call reviews, and suddenly you're starting to see signs of hope here. You're starting to hear things that you've been training and coaching the reps on. They're starting to come to fruition, and you're starting to hear them. Yeah, sounds like their calls are starting to go a bit better. And then by magic in week 4, they turn up and they have an amazing call, where they've been able to apply everything that you've been coaching them on over the past few weeks. And that is the kind of journey that you take reps on through the process of reviewing interactions. So another critical thing that you want to be thinking about when you are onboarding reps with a view to kind of decreasing ramp time is thinking beyond getting to adhere to process and coaching and training them and having a good coaching and onboarding program. Is what are the motivational levers that I can be pulling in order to get reps feeling excited and confident about what they are doing. So the way that we think about this is that we are trying to apply all of these motivational levers, which I have up on the screen. I'll just chat you through them. So one of the biggest ones is you can find ways to engineer early wins for your team members. So that might be if you can figure out a way of getting them to reach out to soft accounts where you know they're going to get positive email responses that they can use to book meetings in. Or another example of this would be, say, that when you basically make sure you don't allow reps to respond to kind of any positive interactions that they have until they've sat down with you, talked it through, and you've got a game plan with them that makes it almost impossible for them not to go and secure a meeting on the back of having had a positive response from somebody. Commission is obviously a kind of fundamental motivational lever in sales. But what we like to do in our business is actually reward the first time somebody hits their full quota of sales accepted leads. So that is qualified meetings that have taken place. The first time they hit their full quota in a month, we double their commission so that they have a really big incentive to hit that number. And then they also get used to the idea of making a large amount of money, and that kind of sets their own expectation for themselves going forward. Competitions, incentives, also a massive motivational lever to pull if you do it right. I mean, fundamental to that is also that you need to have hired the right people in the first place. So you want to be hiring people who are competitive and they get a buzz out of competing with one another. So running regular incentives and competitions where team members get to compete with one another and creating an environment where there's lots of friendly banter around that is a massive lever that you can use to kind of pull and get people to perform faster. Also, in terms of your culture, building in a culture where there are recognition rituals. So super cliched. I, to some extent, was against it, but my team really wanted to have a bell in the office. And we've now got a bell. And so as an example, every time a meeting gets booked, the team rings a bell. Every time a meeting gets sat and is confirmed as a qualified opportunity, the bell gets rung. Similarly, like we have, although we can track everything on dashboards, on our machines, we actually have a physical glass board where people go and write up their numbers and update their numbers. And that's part of the ritual, which people really enjoy, where they're being seen to be successful. And that's also a motivational lever that we pull. Also, mini promotions and career progression. So you can build those in during the onboarding path as well. So for us, the first kind of call it mini promotion or career progression is when somebody has, after they have passed all the kind of tests in terms of understanding their domain knowledge and sales craft, and have also had their first 2 meetings set. The last motivational lever, which my opinion is really, really important, particularly if you're managing SDRs, is being in office. So being a sales development rep is really, really hard work, and it's hard grind. And I would hate to be an SDR sitting in my lounge, grinding out 60 dials a day with not having any team around me. And so what we find from a kind of motivational point of view is people enjoy the work a lot more when they have other reps around them, and they are also able to share the kind of highs and lows of the role. Like if they had a really bad call, they're able to laugh about it with colleagues who are sitting next to them, and it doesn't feel nearly as bad as if they're sitting at home on their own just grinding away. So moving on, from motivational levers, just want to chat through the kind of essential SDR management routines, which we kind of apply from day one with people in our business. So on a weekly basis, we run weekly meetings, which is essentially where we're covering campaign updates. Individuals and teams are reporting on their performance versus targets, and they're setting goals for the week. Every day, team members have daily huddles where they are talking through the activity and outcomes from the past day, and also planning for the upcoming day and highlighting any blockers. This is critical to ramping reps fast, because this is where we drive adherence to process in terms of hitting minimum metrics in terms of new contacts added to the pipeline, dials made, emails sent, ensuring that there are no overdue tasks. Call reviews, I have spoken about a bit, but we run call review. So a manager will often be reviewing a rep's calls and might be providing ad hoc feedback to them, but we have a structured process whereby weekly teams of reps and a manager will be doing call reviews, and then we have a structured process for how calls are reviewed. So it's essentially broken. So we break down a call on the basis of the process that you should be following when you're walking a prospect down the journey from picking up the phone to agreeing to part with a meeting. And what we are doing there is both the rep themselves and the rest of the team are making notes of what was good for each element of the call and what were areas for improvement. The rep then first off will provide feedback to the team on what they thought was good and what they thought needed to improve. And then the rest of the team will provide feedback as well. And the manager will lastly give their feedback. And there'll be a key takeaway from that call in terms of an improvement item that the rep can go away and focus on in terms of the next week ahead. This is really, really important, this kind of creating this kind of feedback and accountability culture in a business from day one. And this is part of the adherence to process as well. So you want to make sure that new reps are turning up for these meetings and they are coming with proper calls, and they're coming with bad calls, and they are and they're getting comfortable with the idea that they are going to be there's going to be direct feedback on what they're doing, which is going to help them to get to success faster. We have a similar process for email reviews as well, which is also a weekly session, which follows a similar structure to call reviews. So that essentially covers all the items that I had today about how to onboard and ramp reps faster. If anybody has questions, please, or comments on this, please fire away. I will stay on this call for the next 5 minutes or so. So please feel free to fire away with questions. All right, brilliant. Well, I think no questions. So, sorry, guys. I think that there might be people asking questions, but I'm not sure if they're coming through on my end. So, let me just double check this. Yeah, so I think there's a delay. Does it lag on my end with questions coming through? So okay, great. Well, unfortunately, I can't see the stuff that's coming through here. So I think we're going to have to hop off here. A little technical issue, but everybody, thank you for joining, and it was good to run you through all this info.